Hey, good evening. You're watching Primetime. I'm Tamanna Inamdar.
And my name is Ayush Alavadi. Let's have a look at the headlines first. The Reserve Bank of India sets a March 2018 deadline for lenders to provide for bad loans identified under its second list of stressed assets. That's an exclusive.
The telecom regulator recommends increasing the overall spectrum holding cap for service providers from 25 to 35%. This, the regulator hopes, will spur M&A activity in the sector.
Just a day after the CBEC asked FMCG firms to pass on lower GST rates, Dabur cuts prices of shampoos and home care products by 9%.
Kishore Bayani unveils Future Group 3.0 as he looks to take on e-commerce players, partners with Google to open 10,000 omni-channel stores by 2022.
The Sensex nifty gain for the fourth straight day. Pharma stocks lead the rally.
And Dalveer Bhandari is re-elected to the International Court of Justice after the General Assembly overwhelmingly threw its weight behind him, forcing Britain to withdraw its candidate. Now, the RBI has set a shorter deadline for banks to deal with their exposure to accounts mentioned on the second list of stressed assets. Bankers have told Bloomberg Quint that they have to provide for these loans by the end of March next year. Vishwanath Nair, who broke that story, is joining us now with all the details. Vishwanath, you've been speaking to a number of bankers through the day. What are they saying about this new deadline?
So how we understand it is that during the first list, which came out in June, the Reserve Bank of India had said that you have to do the provisioning, spread it out across 3 quarters so that you don't have to take the entire hit in that single quarter. So that was a bit of a breather for them. But when it comes to the second list, now they have a December 13 deadline before which they have to restructure these accounts outside the NCLT. If you fail that December 13 deadline, that's when these accounts will go into the NCLT, and that's when you have to start providing for them as the RBI requires them to know. The provisioning requirement number is important because it says 50% of all secured exposure that you have against these accounts and 100% in all unsecured assets. So that's going to be a bit of a hit. Remember, the first list was only 12 accounts and the second list is about 30, but the outstanding exposure is lesser when it comes to the second list.
Right, Vishi, just hold that thought, because just to understand this story a little further, we're joined by Shashwata Gua, Director at Fitch Ratings. Shashwata, thank you so much for speaking with us on Bloomberg Quint. Vishwanath and Tamanna were actually discussing what this really means, but I want to understand from you how this will actually impact bank books and what this means for profitability.
Hi. The simple answer is that it is what it really means is continued weak profitability. We already saw as of September 2017, the first half results, almost 60% of the state-owned banks continue to report loss.
Mr. Gupta, unfortunately, I don't have a very clear line with you. So I'm going to try and come back to you in just a couple of minutes while we fix that line. I also have BP Sharma, former MD and CEO of Bank of India, to talk about this development. Thank you so much, Mr. Sharma, for speaking with us on Prime Time. And I'll take that same question to you. What does this mean for bank books and profitability? It's a shorter deadline. It's about 2 quarters. Will banks manage?
See, if you take the entire finance year, it makes a little difference whether it is made in 2 quarters or 3 quarters or 4 quarters. After all, the entire financial year performance will remain the same, whether it provisions are made quarter-wise or made little bit in advance. But coming to the second list, where the banks are required to make 50% provision, is definitely a tall claim, a big stress on the bank's balance sheet, because many of the banks, the word P is still missing.
Right, Mr. Sharma, this is Vishwanath here. Wanted to pose this question to you. The bankers have been doing this recognition business since October when the RBI first came up with the AQR, and that has continued on ever since for the last 2 years. So now, do you feel that this recognition will now probably end, and now the focus will move to resolution completely?
No, provisioning does not lead to resolution. I think that is only the accounting standard that is required to be done. Resolution of account will take place depends on so many factors, law and the security that is available and the strength of the balance sheet to absorb the loss. Because any account which is resolved implies a partial write-up of the amount.
All right.
If-
Yeah, please continue your thought, Mr. Gua, Mr. Sharma.
So partial write-up of the account, that write-up has to be debited to P&L. So depending upon the value of security, the outstanding, the difference, and the provisioning available, there are some of the banks may not be in a position to absorb the loss even if the account is resolved. That will reduce their capital adequacy.
Fair enough. But the government, it's interesting you bring up the point about capital adequacy, and that's probably a measure that you had to face when you were heading Bank of India. But then the government this time around has promised a large sort of recapitalization package. They're saying about 2.11 lakh crore for the entire public sector banking space. You think that should be enough to cover, whatever the needs are?
It will be reasonably enough, provided no further slippage comes.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough, Mr. Sharma.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Sharma, for speaking with us. Vishwanath, what is the general sense? And you asked that question to Shashwat as well. But I think Ayush was bringing the question about implications, but will this mean that by the end of March 2018, most of this process of banks recognizing their bad debt might be behind us? We're looking at a fresh start?
Yeah, so, if you look at the first list, now the outstanding exposure was already about 25% of the entire gross NPAs of the banking system. Now the second list comes in and there's a bunch of assets there as well. So, a major part of this recognition and about 50% of the provisioning is over. But we still have to wait and watch what is going to happen through the NCLT process, because that is going to be key. Even in the first list, that NCLT process is not over, the resolution is still going on. Unless we see some kind of positive action coming in from those assets, from at least the first 12, and then probably later on this new list, we can't really say if these problems are over. Definitely, FY19 will be a low provisioning year. Most likely, is going to be a low provisioning year because you would have finished a lot of it in FY18. So
sure. Right. In fact, we have Shashwata Guha back with us. Hopefully, we can hear you more clearly. Mr. Guha, the point you were making about implication on the books and balance sheets of banking companies, and will they manage to squeeze this process into a couple of quarters now?
Well, we hope so, but we don't expect things to materially change, at least over the next 4 to 6 quarters from here. And a large part of that is going to be because of the potential provisioning or haircuts that could likely come through as a result of the pace of resolution and what gets resolved when. This has been the story for the last 2 odd quarters as well, where we have seen incrementally the pace of NPLs coming down. But it's really the catch-up that the banks are doing with respect to provisioning. And I think that story will continue, as I said, over the next 4 to 6 quarters.
Right, Shashwata, thanks so much for joining us yet again. But what I want to understand from you is, Vishy was explaining the sort of timelines. And considering the first list and now the second list, what could really explain this sort of sense of hurry when it comes to the regulator with these timelines?
Right. Well, it's important to understand what does provisioning on a bad asset really mean. Provisioning, to a large extent, if you see, is driven by the recovery expectations against a bad asset, and and that itself is a function of how long the asset has been bad. If you look at these so-called, whether it's 12 names or the next list of around 30 names, most of these assets have been in a stress situation well over 2 years. So if you look at the RBI's guidelines on incurred provisioning, most of these assets would have already been provided for, to an extent of around 40-45%. The question really is that enough? Or would banks require more as and when these assets get into resolution? And I think the RBI's move to
sort of nudge banks towards getting the assets provisioned up to 50% is sort of bears that in mind. Because as far as the second list is concerned, uh, mind you, I think it was almost sort of public news that these banks are working on a certain deadline, and if that deadline of resolution does not work, or banks are not able to find resolution within that deadline, then these accounts would be forcibly pushed through the IBC. And the fact that RBI has come back and now asked banks to do the needful, in a way suggests that they have not been able to find resolution for most of these accounts, or are unlikely to, sort of do so before the due date. And I think it is only natural, therefore, for banks to therefore increase the provisioning, because if you look at India's, history, the average loss given default for loans in India has been in the range of 75 odd percent. And if you look where public sector banks in particular stand today, their average provision cover is just about 45-47%. So I'm not saying that everything will possibly attract a haircut of 75%. That itself will be a function of how quickly resolution happens from now onwards. And I think December to March quarter would be a good enough, sort of that period would be a litmus test of what happens for the first 12 accounts, which I think would set the tone for a resolution for the second list. But in all probability, we carry the view that haircuts by banks would well exceed the current level of provisioning that is there, and therefore 50% on these accounts does not seem very aggressive.
Just to close this conversation, what we were looking at was also the kind of divergences that are emerging. Not only FY16, then later in FY17, the RBI conducted another sort of assessment of bank books and came up with a new list of accounts where they believe these accounts should be NPAs and the bankers don't. And then we have seen, Axis Bank, Yes Bank, all of them announcing this kind of divergence, and most likely during the third quarter, more banks are going to come up. So, will more such divergences come across? What is your assessment of the situation? Are we likely to see this NPA number? Because that seems to be the factor that is being closely watched. It seems to have sort of plateaued. But do you see that going up at any time later this financial year?
Well, I won't say it is plateaued. We're certainly seeing a sort of slowdown in terms of the incremental. But overall, we think the NPL numbers will continue to rise. As far as divergences are concerned, I think because of the systems that have been put in place over the last, and I'm particularly talking about the large credit repository, and now the data that the central bank has as a result of that, I think incrementally we will see divergences reducing more and more. In fact, what we saw in this quarter was a large part of the divergences were being reported by the private sector banks, which, if you recall, back in March 2016, did not have the kind of impact that other banks had post the RBI's asset quality review. Well, divergences, one, of course, is nothing new in the sector. I think, and I've been looking at the sector for a good 7-8 years, and we've often heard about these divergences. But I think what has changed is the central bank's tolerance to continue to have these divergences. And I think thanks to the wisdom that it's gained from the data that has now been being put into that sort of system by the individual banks, I think there is a general inclination to sort of minimize that gap. And I think going forward, I think in the next maybe 1 or 2 or other more quarters, I think a large part of the divergences should ideally be addressed. That being said, we don't. Yeah.
Sure. Thank you so much, Mr. Guha, for joining us this evening on Primetime. And on that newer deadline of 4 banks, Vishwanath, this is something which will show its impact over the next few days to come.
Yes, so as the December 13th deadline comes in, you will know which of these accounts actually go into the NCLT, and then by that extension, you will know what kind of provisioning, as at least can be expected before the financial year ends.
That leads us into the next important story we're talking about this evening on Primetime. 11 months after the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code came into effect, the Indian government is setting up a 14-member committee to review the rules. One of the changes could be barring defaulting promoters from repurchasing assets. Bloomberg News' Shruti Srivastav gets us all the details in this report.
There have been concerns on defaulting promoters trying to wrest control of their companies which are facing insolvency proceedings. Now, there are 12 large companies which are on the block right now, and the lenders have already invited bids from interested parties. Reportedly, many of these promoters are trying to bid for their companies which are facing insolvency proceedings. It is keeping this in mind that the government has formed a 14-member panel basically to look into all the issues and concerns which have been raised by the stakeholders. Now, Corporate Affairs Minister Mr. P.P. Chaudhary has told us in an interview that all the stakeholders which have raised similar concerns, all their concerns will be addressed by this panel. Now, there is a thinking in the government that yes, the willful defaulters should not be allowed to bid for their assets. When asked about this question, Mr. Chaudhary said that yes, willful defaulters may not be allowed to bid for the companies which are facing insolvency proceedings. However, only when the panel gives its report after 2 months will the government take a final call on this.
All right, staying with the banking space, if there's one banker who's looking to make the most of this opportunity, it's Uday Kotak. In a conversation with Bloomberg, he said, and I quote, "The whole insolvency and bankruptcy process is a once-in-a-lifetime event. Through this, you could actually get assets that would give disproportionate returns for long periods of time." Now, you can read more from Uday Kotak's interview on BloombergQuint.com, of course. Now, FMCG major Dabur has cut the prices of existing stocks across categories by 9% following reduction in the GST rates. The reduction will be applicable on shampoos, skin and home care products.
Now, the move comes a day after CBEC chairperson Vanaja Sarna asked consumer goods companies to revise the maximum retail price of products in line with the revised GST rates. Besides reducing prices on existing stocks, Dabur has also revised the MRP of fresh production with immediate effect, which will hit the shelves by next month. Now, e-commerce may be gathering steam in India, but the brick-and-mortar players are not throwing in the towel just yet. In fact, Kishore Biyani today upped the ante on e-commerce players by unveiling Future Retail 3.0. The new-look Future Retail will focus on omni-store sales catering only to members. Biyani is targeting a reach of over 10,000 stores across the country by 2022, as he sees a $1 trillion opportunity in the Indian market. The Future Group has also partnered with Google India to help expand its online reach.
Charlene D'Souza, who's covering that event, joins us now. Charlene, those are some big names from the tech world, be it Google, Facebook or Paytm. How will all of these announcements play out on the ground?
Okay, so after burning nearly 300 crores in the year 2007 in e-commerce, this is the second time that Kishore Biyani is actually venturing into the e-commerce space. But this time, actually, it's not even e-commerce. You know, it's probably taking, the help of Google and Facebook and the data, basically combining all the consumer data. And you know what? Google will help Future Retail to undertake catchment analysis and store location processes. Google will also help Future Group to identify customers for each location. Now, what is Facebook's participation in this entire thing? The Facebook's partnership with Future Group is to take their database and also to combine it with Facebook's database, and then will go and give forward the customer's database back to Future Group. Now, what does this mean? And this, since it's a membership only, all the membership's data will then be with Future Group. Now, so far the company already has 5 lakh customers with them. With EasyDay, the existing EasyDay stores will all turn into EasyDay Club stores. By FY18, the company has outlined to open 1,100 EasyDay Club stores. Now, taking us through it, I have Kishore Biyani to tell us what is Retail 3.0.
I think we have visualized ourselves in terms of building scenarios for the future and how we are going to adopt technology and how technology will help us increasing our capacity of doing business. And that's what we have unveiled. How the layer of physical, digital sits in, and how do we expand our business?
Also, can you tell us whom are you tying up with for this? How do you plan on using your data, all your consumer data for this? And also you said that Easy Day Club stores will also, you will start Easy Day Club stores. So what happens to your existing Easy Day stores going ahead?
I think every Easy Day store is getting converted into Easy Day Club stores. Membership has already started. And we are looking at tying up with various partners on technology side because we can't build every technology on our own. So Facebook, Google, Reverie, multiple technology partners on various levels we are tying up with and collaborating to build a platform on which we can serve the customer much better.
Now, India's telecom regulator has suggested a higher cap on spectrum holdings of telecom operators to encourage mergers and acquisitions. The TRAI says the total spectrum an operator or a service provider can hold in various bands should be raised to 35% from 25%. Arpan Chaturvedi guesses all the details in this report.
So just to put this in context, what the current policy as far as the spectrum cap is concerned is that as far as the individual bands, for example, the 700 megahertz or the 800 or the 900 megahertz bands are concerned, in that the limit is that there has to be a 50% cap on an individual operator acquiring spectrum or having spectrum in individual bands are concerned, and the overall limit of 25%. Now, the new recommendation of the TRAI, the changes that have been brought in are basically that as far as the overall spectrum cap across all bands combined is concerned, that limit has been raised from 35%, or the recommendation is that it should be raised from 35% from the current 25%, and on the individual bands the 50% limit, the TRAI said that those rules should be done away with, and the press release says that instead of that there should be a cap of 50% on the combined spectrum holding in the sub 1 hertz band, which includes the 700 megahertz band and the 800 and the 900 bands. Now, these recommendations of the TRAI has come after a letter from the Department of Telecom or the Telecom Ministry, which has constituted an interministerial group to consider the comments that had come in the past on the financial stress in the telecom sectors, and the IMG was set up after that, and as part of the recommendations or the deliberations of the IMG, it had sought opinion on different issues, in one of which was the spectrum cap, and on that the TRAI's opinion was sought, and these recommendations are part of that letter or the reply to that request from the Telecom Ministry. Now, once this has been forwarded to the IMG, the Telecom Commission will meet in December to finalize the IMG recommendations, which would, after it's finalized, will be forwarded to the Union Cabinet for their final approval.
Well, Mahindra & Mahindra has set up a new manufacturing unit in Detroit in the United States, making it the first automaker in 25 years to inaugurate a facility in the erstwhile hub of automakers in the US. How will this big move impact M&M? Yatin Mota brings us the answer in this report.
As far as M&M is concerned, this is probably one of the largest investments that they are doing in for setting up a facility outside India. Now, if you look at the Bloomberg report, we have Mahindra & Mahindra, which will be investing close to $230 million in Detroit, US, for setting up a road vehicle unit. As far as the total investment ramp-up plans are concerned, by 2020, Mahindra plans to pump in another $600 million. So it is more or less a 6,000 crore investment that Mahindra & Mahindra will be making in its US facilities by the year 2020. Of course, M&M also said that they might introduce various luxury car, SUVs in the SsangYong brand in the US market. So that is also something that the investor will be keenly watching out for. But as far as Mahindra & Mahindra is concerned, they have been quite aggressive with the US market strategy, especially in the tractor segment. And now, probably with this facility coming up in Detroit, plus the kind of SsangYong exports they plan to do to the US, would garner in much better revenues than the analysts were working with earlier.
Now, straight on to a quick check on markets today. Indian markets rose for the fourth straight day thanks to gains in index heavyweights Reliance Industries, Sun Pharma and HDFC Bank. Both Sensex and Nifty gained around 0.3%. Neeraj Shah sums up the day's market action in this report.
The markets did close above the 20-day moving average, if that is any consolation. But yeah, off the highs of the day for all the key indices. So the Nifty, the Sensex, as well as the mid caps and the small caps as well, off the day's high. So that was probably a touch disappointing. In fact, the mid-cap index, the Nifty 50 mid-cap index ending marginally in the red. But let's take a look at the individual components and what ruled the roost today. The top contributors was Reliance Industries by margin, contributing about 10 points to the Nifty gain today. And that one stood out after a bunch of brokerage notes came out. Very bullish notes came out as well. Pharma as a pocket did well because of the positive news rub-off on Dr. Reddy's, but that did well. Sun Pharma participated, a couple of others like Aurobindo, Cipla, etc. participated as well. So Pharma, by and large, had a fairly decent day, but it's a mixed day of trade for IT. So divergent moves by Tech Mahindra, which was up about 3.5%, and the big boy TCS down about 1%. The broader end of the spectrum punctuated by a bunch of stocks which hit new highs and gained really well. So tea prices moved up. McLeod Russell spoke to us and said that he believed that these prices would stay. So McLeod Russell up 11%, Russell India up 7%. Some of the others too had a fairly decent outing in the session today. Also, continued gains for the real estate names. Kolte Patil another 4%, Purvankara another 11% in trade. Some of the others too. Zendu Realty, for example, was up about 5-6%. So clutch of these mid-cap real estate names continue to rise and shine. What came off today and maybe continued to go down, select names. So Rain Industries had a fabulous up move when it had, down consistently now for the past 7-8 sessions. Jet Airways corrected big time today, 8%. The market wasn't quite enthused by what came out of the investor conference call, and that stock taking a beating of another kind. Remember, in the FNO ban, but taking a big beating. Lastly, just have to the sum and substance of what happened in trade today was that we closed below the highs of the day, but did much better than what the global markets were doing.
So market regulators SEBI and stock exchanges are examining trade details of over 24 stocks. This is part of a probe into the alleged leak of financial details of the firms through messaging platform WhatsApp. SEBI is mulling over seeking call data records of the people involved. PTI reports that several listed blue chip names are among the companies that are being probed. Meanwhile, exchanges are analyzing the trade data of the firms over the last year to detect any possible breach of norms.
Now, Dr. Reddy's laboratory wants to invite the US pharma watchdog to its Duvada plant. The drug maker, which produces 2 of its key cancer drugs at this facility, is seeking a re-inspection after the US FDA issued a fresh establishment inspection report, which did not remove the import ban imposed 3 years back. Now, how will this impact Dr. Reddy's? Darshan Mehta tells us in this report.
They received a letter from the US FDA indicating that they've received an EIR for their Duvada plant, but at the same time, in the same press release, what they also say is that the cover letter also indicated the fact that that the inspection has not yet closed for them, and the site remains unchanged. So at this point of time, it's pretty much status quo as far as the warning letter is concerned. The FDA has also indicated the fact that they've released the EIR to be transparent about the regulatory process. What does this mean for Dr. Reddy's? The warning letter stays, the 483 stays. That means no further approvals will come into this product, because Dr. Reddy expects that in 2018 the US FDA will come back and re-inspect the plant. So till 2018, till the time the FDA comes in, new product approvals won't come in for Dr. Reddy. The breather that came in because of Dr. Reddy's is because of this EIR is that the street had anticipated that probably an import alert would come in as far as this plant is concerned, and the chances of the import alert now coming go down significantly with the receipt of this EIR by the US FDA.
The government has granted the long-standing demand of the logistics sector, allowing it infrastructure status. Somit Sarkar of Bloomberg Quinn tells us how it benefits the players in the logistics space in this report.
Government has done this. They have now changed the earlier transport category to transport and logistics category, and has included logistics infrastructure as an infrastructure subsector in this list. Now, transport and logistics include roads, bridges, ports, shipyards, inland waterways, airports, railway tracks, etc. But what is new and what has now been added is the logistics infrastructure. So what does that cover? Now, logistic infrastructure means and includes multimodal logistic park with a minimum investment of 50 crore rupees and a minimum area of 10 acre. cold chain facility with a minimum investment of 15 crore rupees and a minimum area of 20,000 square feet, and also warehousing facility which with a minimum investment of 25 crore rupees and a minimum area of 1 lakh square feet. So what are the benefits that this logistic companies will get? Now this sector is now likely to attract more funding at competitive rates. Having an infrastructure status would also help the logistics sector get credit at marginally lower interest rate and on a long-term basis. Now this move will also give the sector access to large amount of funds through external commercial borrowings, and this move could also attract large debt and pension funds to invest in the sector. Lastly, it will also bring down the cost of borrowings for the developers. Now, why this move was needed? Now, this move was needed because the logistic cost in India is very high according to a McKinsey report. Now, India spends around 13% of its GDP on logistics, which is very high when compared to US and Germany, which are developed countries. Now, US spends around 9.5% of its GDP on logistics, while Germany spends around 8% of its GDP on logistics. Now, as logistic cost is high, Indian goods become less competitive in the global market. So, this move will not only help the logistic company get a credit on a easier basis, but will also make Indian goods more competitive in the global markets. So there are a bunch of companies that will benefit because of this, but to name few is TCI Express, Snowman Logistics, Mahindra Logistics, All Cargo, Blue Dart and Container Corporation of India.
Right, some national news. Union Minister for Parliamentary Affairs, Anand Kumar, has said that the government will call the winter session of Parliament in December. He also confirmed that the dates will be announced soon. This comes a day after Congress President Sonia Gandhi accused the BJP of sabotaging the winter session of the Parliament. Anand Kumar said the Congress is suffering from selective amnesia.
Now, Anand Kumar also pointed out that the winter session was held in December in the years 2008 and 2013 during the UPA regime. Kumar said that Congress is levelling allegations out of desperation and frustration as it would be routed in Gujarat and Himachal Assembly elections. The winter session is traditionally convened in the third week of November and lasts to the third week of December. Now, the government is considering to bring a legislation in the winter session of Parliament to put an end to instantaneous triple talaq. Government officials today said that a ministerial committee has been set up to propose a suitable legislation or to amend existing penal provisions which would make instantaneous triple talaq an offence. Remember, in August, the Supreme Court had struck down the controversial Islamic practice of instant divorce as arbitrary and unconstitutional.
Now, India's Dalveer Bhandari was re-elected to the International Court of Justice today. It was a tough fight for re-election between Bhandari and the United Kingdom's Christopher Greenwood, as the UN found itself unable to decide between the two to fill the final of the 5 vacancies for judges at ICJ. Bhandari's overwhelming support from the United Nations General Assembly and the Security Council led to Britain withdrawing its candidate. This is the first time in 71 years that the UK will not have a judge on the ICJ bench.
Now, let's tell you a little bit more about Justice Dalveer Bhandari. Now, Justice Dalveer Bhandari was born on October 1st, 1946 in Jodhpur. He passed his bachelor's in law from Jodhpur University and finished his postgrad from a Northwestern University in Chicago. A member at the International Court of Justice from 2012, Bhandari has delivered several separate opinions on a host of issues, including financing of terrorism and also violation of sovereign rights. Bhandari's re-election comes at a time when the ICJ will deliberate on India's challenge against the death sentence given to former Indian naval officer Kulbhushan Jadhav by Pakistan.
Now, former judge at the Supreme Court of India from 2005 to 2012, Justice Bhandari has passed several key judgments, including his suggestions to amend the Hindu Marriage Act. Bhandari was also Chief Justice of the Bombay High Court from 2004 to 2005. Before his term in Bombay High Court, Bhandari was a judge at the Delhi High Court. Bhandari is also a recipient of the Padma Bhushan and Dr. Nagendra Singh International Peace Award. So the question is that why does this matter? What does this hard-fought victory for India, diplomatic victory at the United Nations actually mean, and why should we care? I'll be talking about that a little while later in Primetime Debate. I am going to be joined by Mukul Rohatgi, Neelam Deo, as well as Lord Meghnad Desai.
Moving on, Union Health Minister JP Nadda has sought a detailed report from Fortis Memorial Research Institute over the death of a 7-year-old girl. The government took notice of the case after massive social media backlash over a bill of 16 lakh rupees that was handed to the girl's parents by Fortis.
मैंने हॉस्पिटल अथॉरिटीज़ को इससे की उनकी पूछताछ की है और मैंने उनको कहा है कि आप एक डिटेल्ड रिपोर्ट भारत सरकार स्वास्थ्य मंत्रालय को भेजें और मैंने स्वास्थ्य सचिव से कहा है कि वह इसके पर देखें, उनके डिटेल्ड रिपोर्ट पर कार्रवाई करें और whatever needed action is there, we will be taking.
Now, this case came to light after the 7-year-old girl who was admitted to Fortis Memorial Research Institute in Gurgaon died shortly after leaving the hospital. What made people take notice was the huge bill that was handed to the family. According to various interviews that the family has given to the media, they claim that the girl was given 500 injections in 15 days. The family also alleges that the doctors deliberately refused to carry out a CT or an MRI scan on the girl. The family also claims that the doctors prescribed a full-body plasma transplant despite brain damage. Fortis, on its part, has said that all standard medical protocol was followed and that the hospital adhered to all clinical guidelines. The hospital also claims to have given a complete breakdown of the items that were charged to the family.
Now, in the ongoing row over Padmavati, Uttar Pradesh Chief Minister Yogi Adityanath has said that Sanjay Leela Bhansali and Deepika Padukone are equally responsible for protests over their upcoming film. Lashing out at Bhansali, he said that if action has to be taken, it will be against both the sides, including fringe outfits and the filmmakers. The Uttar Pradesh government has said that it would not allow the film to release until controversial portions have been removed.
हम लोगों ने अपनी जो भी हमारी आपत्तियां थीं और जो हमारे सुझाव थे, हम लोग सूचना प्रसारण मंत्रालय को उससे अवगत सबसे पहले करा चुके हैं और मुझे लगता है कि हमारी उन भावनाओं को या प्रदेश की 22 करोड़ जनता की उन भावनाओं को सभी लोग, सक्षम लोग जान गए हैं और मुझे लगता है कि किसी को भी जन भावनाओं के साथ खिलवाड़ करने की छूट नहीं मिलेगी.
Now, Bitcoin fell as much as 5.4%, the most in a week, before recovering to $8,300 levels after the cryptocurrency company Tether reported a $31 million theft. The amount was taken from Tether's treasury wallet on November 19th and sent to an unauthorized Bitcoin address, according to an announcement on the company's website posted on Tuesday. The stolen tokens will not be redeemed, and the company is trying to prevent them from entering the ecosystem. Bitcoin is currently trading at $8,306.
Now, Chinese tech company Tencent has surpassed Facebook in market value and, wait for this, has become the first Chinese tech company to break into the world's 5 largest companies. Tencent has rallied over 125% this year alone. Its market share has risen by $292 billion as of today. Now, this rally has made Tencent's founder Ma Huateng the second richest man in mainland China. Tencent is now valued at $523 billion, a notch above Facebook's $522 billion market capitalization. Tencent's climb, however, has stretched historical valuations. It's now trading at more than 50 times forward earnings, higher than an average of roughly 30 over the past 2 years.
German Chancellor Angela Merkel said last night that she would rather face voters than cobble an alliance after coalition talks failed to end the political stalemate in Germany. Where does that leave Europe's largest economy, and what are the options before the German president? Well, Bloomberg's Matt Miller sums up the answers in this report.
Really, it's anyone's guess now, because it would be such a long time until we have those new elections. We would have renewed campaigning. One thing Merkel is sure about is that she does not want to be in a minority government. And indeed, the German people would prefer not to have a minority government. There have been a number of polls since Sunday night showing that the Germans overwhelmingly prefer new elections to that. So do many of the parties. You heard Merkel say that she does there. The SPD also would prefer new elections. The Greens have also said that they would prefer new elections. The president, Frank-Walter Steinmeier, whose role is for the most part ceremonial, in this case, constitutionally, is in charge. It is his responsibility now to oversee some formation of a new government. His first order of business is to try and prod the other parties into a coalition, either the coalition that didn't happen, the Jamaica coalition. He's going to meet with the FDP and the Greens today, or another grand coalition. Tomorrow he meets with the SPD to try and force his former party into a coalition, or at least coalition talks with Merkel. It's very difficult and indeed unprecedented. It's never come to new elections in Germany post-war. What Steinmeier has to do, if he finds that he can't form a new coalition, is then to name a temporary chancellor and allow Parliament to vote. Parliament then has to vote 3 times. If they can't come up with a new chancellor and a new government, then they go to new elections. But this would take some time. Indeed, a lot of people are saying it wouldn't be until April that we have new elections here.
Habe nicht sozusagen in meiner Planung eine.
I have no plans for a minority government at the moment, so we have to wait. A new election is one way, a minority government is another. In a country that has so much to do, that would be something to be thought of very, very carefully. I don't want to say never, but I'm very skeptical, and I think new elections would be the better way.
Well, that's about all the time we have on this bulletin, but you have to stay tuned for Primetime Debate. What's up on Primetime Debate, Tamanna?
So, you could call it an international story, but one which has invoked huge amounts of pride within the Indian government, and of course a lot of Indians, people are calling it like a big win over our previous colonial masters. So that's the kind of, hyperbole. But it's basically, this is the story. An Indian judge, Dalveer Bhandari, has been re-elected to the 15-member panel of the International Court of Justice. I'm speaking to 3 very prominent people: former Attorney General of India, Mukul Rohatgi, former Ambassador Neelam Deo, and Lord Meghna Desai, who's member of House of Lords, to explain why it's such a big deal. That's coming up next. Don't go away.